Good evening. Welcome to Loveworld USA News. I'm TGK Andre. First, let's take a quick look at the top stories this evening. President Trump moves to revive the death penalty in Washington, D.C. amid the crime crackdown. The FBI probe of John Bolton set to extend beyond book as legal risks mount. The U.S. threatens funding cuts to 3 states over trucker English proficiency enforcement. A judge dismisses Trump administration suit against Maryland's federal judges, warns of potentially calamitous precedent. And the Fed Governor Lisa Cook rejects removal letter, vows to stay as legal fight looms. And now to the news. President Donald Trump has announced he will seek to revive capital punishment in Washington, D.C. for people convicted of murder, folding the move into his ongoing federal crime crackdown at the nation's capital. He made the call to reporters during a cabinet meeting. D.C. repealed its death penalty in 1981 after the Supreme Court in 1972 struck down then-existing capital punishment schemes as unconstitutional. Many states later rewrote their laws and resumed executions. 27 states currently allow the death penalty. The White House did not outline how the policy would be implemented in the district, where reinstating capital punishment would likely require congressional action or federal prosecutions under existing federal capital statutes. The death penalty push follows an August 11th federal intervention in D.C., public safety that included mobilizing National Guard troops and asserting temporary federal control over local policing. Officials say the effort has produced more than 1,000 arrests and 12 straight days without a homicide. Under the Home Rule Act, any federal takeover of the Metropolitan Police Department beyond 30 days would require congressional approval. Trump has long advocated capital punishment and cited an executive order in January directing the Justice Department to pursue it in cases demanding its use. Further details on timelines, charging policy, and any legislation tied to D.C. were not immediately provided. Let's take a look.
It'll be a crime-free city. By the way, speaking of that, anybody murders something in the Capitol, capital punishment, capital punishment. If somebody kills somebody in the Capitol, Washington, D.C., we're going to be seeking the death penalty. And that's a very strong preventative. And everybody that's heard it agrees with it. I don't know if we're ready for it in this country, but we have it. It is. We have no choice. So in D.C. and Washington, states are going to have to make their own decision. But if somebody kills somebody, like you could have been killed, very lucky you didn't get killed, it's the death penalty. Okay. Fantastic job you're doing. Thank you, Linda. Very much appreciated. How are you doing with the college?
The FBI search of former National Security Advisor John Bolton's home and Washington office is tied to an investigation that reaches beyond his 2020 memoir, according to a person familiar with the matter. The scope of potential charges remain unclear, but reports indicate the warrants were approved by a judge and drew in part on evidence gathered overseas by U.S. intelligence. No charges have been announced, and investigators have not publicly detailed the full contours of the probe. Bolton's book, The Room Where It Happened, has long been a flashpoint. Days before publication, the Justice Department sued to halt the release, alleging classified material remained in the manuscript and that Bolton bypassed the government's pre-publication review. A federal judge allowed the book to proceed because copies had already circulated, but rebuked Bolton for gambling with national security and warned he faced potential civil or criminal exposure. The civil case was later dropped in 2021. National Security Attorney Mark Zaid said Bolton could face risk if early drafts deemed to contain classified information were retained or shared with third parties, such as a publisher, agent, or attorney, conduct that can implicate the Espionage Act. Bolton has maintained he followed the process, removed sensitive details after consultation with reviewers, and that the review was misused to suppress criticism. The raid has reignited accusations of political payback from some critics, while administration officials have said the matter is an ordinary law enforcement investigation. Former U.S. Attorney John Fishwick cautioned that the boundary between legitimate scrutiny and political retribution is being tested. Legal experts know Bolton could raise selective or vindictive prosecution claims if charged, though such defenses are difficult to prove. Watch this.
When FBI agents descended upon Ambassador John Bolton's Maryland home and his D.C. office last week, questions began to accumulate.
What were they looking for?
The White House insisting the FBI is only continuing an investigation it previously started in 2020 over whether Bolton sent highly sensitive classified documents to his family from a private email server while serving as national security advisor during Donald Trump's first term.
He released massive amounts of classified and confidential but classified information. That's illegal.
An investigation halted by the Biden administration.
Unlike the Biden DOJ and the Biden FBI, our law enforcement agencies are going to be driven by law and not by politics. Our focus here is on, did he break the law? Did he commit crimes against the American people? If so, then he deserves to be prosecuted.
Following his time in the White House, Bolton wrote a book that was highly critical of Donald Trump.
Trump has this impression that foreign leaders, especially adversaries, hold him in high regard. I believe they think he's a laughing fool.
Bolton was on now FBI Director Kash Patel's so-called enemies list. Critics say the action is part of a disturbing pattern of Trump targeting those not only who criticize him, but whose assessments he doesn't like the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who was fired after a report that showed disappointing job growth, and the firing this week of the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, who drafted a report which contradicted President Trump's assertion that the U.S. had obliterated nuclear sites in Iran during a June attack.
Anyone who stands up to the president, anyone who criticizes the president, anyone who says anything adverse to the president's interests gets the full weight of the federal government brought down on them.
Trump's supporters have a different take.
This is not political retribution. This is accountability.
The Transportation Department has warned California, Washington, and New Mexico they could lose millions in federal funds unless they begin enforcing federal English language proficiency rules for commercial drivers within 30 days, citing failures uncovered after a deadly August 12th crash in Florida. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said the ultimatum is about road safety. We need to make sure those driving big rigs can understand the road signs and have been well trained. Officials said the Florida crash involved Harjinder Singh, 28 years old, who alleged to be in the U.S. unlawfully, who also attempted an unauthorized U-turn on the Florida Turnpike, jackknifed and collided with a minivan, killing 3 people. After the collision, Singh failed a CDL test, Duffy said. According to the department, Singh had obtained commercial licensing in California and Washington and was stopped for speeding in New Mexico in July, but was not taken out of service despite an inability to speak English. The ELP rule, in effect since June, requires non-proficient drivers to be placed out of service. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration notified the 3 states that they must submit corrective plans within 30 days or face funding cuts. Potential reductions include $33 million for California, $10.5 million for Washington, and $7 million for New Mexico, officials said. Additional steps are available if the states fail to comply, though the department did not detail what those would be. Duffy framed the action as a narrow compliance push rather than a broad penalty, emphasizing the department doesn't want to take away money from the states, but will do so if necessary to enforce federal safety standards. The affected states were given notice of the timeline and expected to respond with enforcement plans aligned to the ELP requirement. Watch this.
This is about keeping people safe on the road. Your families, your kids, your spouses, your loved ones, your friends, we all use the roadway. And we need to make sure that big rigs, semis, can understand the road signs, that they've been well trained, and that when they're pulled over by law enforcement, they're stopped by law enforcement, or there's a crash and law enforcement responds, they can effectively communicate what they have on their rig. There might be a history that they have to be able to communicate.
A federal judge has thrown out the Trump administration's lawsuit against all 15 federal judges in Maryland, calling the case potentially calamitous and an affront to constitutional tradition. U.S. District Judge Thomas Cullen, assigned from Virginia because every Maryland district judge was named, said the executive branch lacked authority to bring the suit and that the judges are immune from such claims. The administration had asked the court to block a standing order by Maryland's chief district judge that pauses deportations until 4 p.m. on the second business day after migrants file habeas petitions, arguing the rule hamstrung immigration enforcement. Cullen said the proper remedy was to appeal the order, not sue a co-equal branch, writing that allowing the case to proceed would offend the rule of law. Cullen also criticized recent attacks on the judiciary from administration officials, noting statements that labeled judges rogue and unhinged. The Maryland bench was represented by former U.S. Solicitor General Paul Clement, who argued the lawsuit sought to curb judicial review as the administration pursues rapid removals. The White House did not immediately comment. The deportation pause order, issued amid a surge of after-hours filings, aims to maintain court jurisdiction and ensure access to counsel while the government responds. Tuesday's ruling leaves that order in place. The Justice Department can appeal to the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Let's take a look.
The DOJ claims that the state was slowing down deportation efforts. A federal court in Virginia, with an appointee of President Trump, dismissed the May order. The Trump administration argued that it would interfere with the executive's branch powers and violate various rules. The judge cited that the administration chose a, quote, different and more confrontational path.
The news will be back after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project is all about making sure the voice of our man of God, Pastor Chris Oyakhilome, arrives exactly when someone needs it the most. It's a global campaign to saturate the world with the gospel of our Lord Jesus like never before.
The gospel is going to go into places that it never was before, into disciplines and areas that it never was before, and establish a higher way of life.
Make a global impact today with your sponsorship of Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project. For every home you sponsor, you send the gospel where it's never gone. You become the reason someone receives life, a second chance, and finds Jesus. Through the dynamic Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project, we've been able to expand our global mission, touching more souls, more regions, and producing a wave of powerful testimonies from people whose lives have been forever changed. Your financial support as a Loveworld USA partner is not just generous, it's supernatural power for global impact. Let's keep sending the gospel into every home through the Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project. Sign up today and sponsor any of the following categories.
It's time for you to give the right sacrifice, the right seed, because it's time for you to get the right harvest.
You can sponsor Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project by calling or going on our website now. Sign up to be Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project partner today. God bless you.
Welcome back. President Donald Trump has indicated the U.S. could allow roughly 600,000 Chinese students to study at American institutions, framing the move as part of a broader thaw with Beijing. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia raised objections soon after, warning that such an influx could include individuals loyal to the Chinese Communist Party. For context, the number of students from China in the 2023-24 academic year was about 277,000, according to widely used higher education data. Trump said admitting the students was very important, while Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick argued that without a large cohort from China, financial strain could ripple through the U.S. higher education and push some lower-tier institutions towards closure. The White House did not immediately elaborate on any timeline, caps, or screening criteria tied to the president's remarks. Greene countered that universities should not depend on international enrollment from China and said a surge could displace opportunities for U.S. students. She also urged greater investment in trade schools, calling them a strong alternative pathway to well-paid, in-demand jobs. Key policy details remain unsettled, including how national security vetting would be applied. Earlier this year, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the administration would work with the Department of Homeland Security to aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students linked to the CCP or studying in sensitive fields, suggesting any expansion in student numbers could be paired with tighter screening. Let's take a look.
President Xi would like me to come to China. It's a very important relationship. As you know, we're taking a lot of money in from China because of the tariffs and different things. And it's a very important relationship. We're going to get along good with China. I hear so many stories about we're not going to allow their students. We're going to allow their students to come in. We're going to allow, it's very important, 600,000 students. It's very important. But we're going to get along with China. But it's a different relationship that we have now with China. It's a much better relationship economically than it was before. With Biden, boy, what he allowed that, I mean, they just took him to the cleaners.
Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook has announced she will not resign after President Donald Trump sent a letter stating she was removed from the Board of Governors effective immediately. Trump cited his constitutional authority and the Federal Reserve Act's for-cause removal provision, alleging there is sufficient reason to believe Cook made false statements on mortgage documents. Cook, appointed in 2022, called the move unlawful and said she will continue her duties. The allegations stem from a referral by Bill Pulte, a Trump appointee to a Housing Finance Oversight Board, who accused Cook of claiming 2 primary residences in 2021 to obtain better loan terms. Pulte has urged the Justice Department to investigate and said the president has ample cause to act. Cook's attorney, Ab Lowell, said he will file suit challenging the attempt, arguing the president lacks authority to remove a sitting Fed governor absent lawful, substantiated cause and due process. The clash immediately drew sharp reactions on Capitol Hill. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Representative Jamie Raskin criticized the effort, calling it baseless and an attack on Fed independence. The Federal Reserve did not immediately comment. If filed, Cook's lawsuit would test the scope of the 1913 Federal Reserve Act's removal clause for governors serving fixed terms and could set precedent for executive power over the central bank. The confrontation comes amid ongoing tensions between the White House and the Fed over interest rate policy, with Trump and allies pressing for cuts to lower borrowing costs and debt service. For now, Cook says she remains on the job. The administration is standing by its letter, and the dispute appears headed for court, where judges may need to delineate the boundary between presidential authority and the central bank's independence. Watch this.
President Donald Trump has said he's firing Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. Trump called on her to resign last week after an accusation from one of his officials that she committed mortgage fraud. It's an unprecedented move that would constitute a sharp escalation in his battle to exert greater control over one of the few independent agencies in Washington. Cook said on Monday night that she would not step down and that the president has no authority to make her do so. Trump's move is likely to touch off an extensive legal battle that will probably go to the Supreme Court and could disrupt financial markets.
The Department of Homeland Security has released a second August tranche of Hurricane Helene aid this week, bringing the month's total to $124 million through FEMA, even as the department advances President Donald Trump's mass deportation framework. Sunday's $28 million allocation targets road repairs and critical infrastructure in hard-hit areas after the Category 4 storm struck Florida. And, of course, its Big Bend and devastated mountain communities across the Smokies. FEMA said funds are earmarked for debris removal and life safety needs, with priority projects including restoration around the Interstate 40 corridor, where eastbound lanes collapse into the Pigeon River near the Tennessee-North Carolina line, serving the primary trucking route over the mountains. Additional awards will focus on stabilizing damaged utilities and reopening regional connectors that remain close to heavy vehicles. The new funding arrives amid partisan crossfire over disaster response and DHS resource allocation. A deputy to Secretary Christina Wem, Tricia McLaughlin, said FEMA is moving faster than ever before under current leadership, contrasting it with the prior administration. Trump has criticized President Joe Biden's initial Helene response. Biden has rejected those claims. Separately, Representative Chuck Edwards from North Carolina said in a public fact check that FEMA told him no disaster funds were diverted to the border after earlier disputes over agency capacity. State and local officials said they expect continuing federal support as long-term recovery begins and mountain freight routes are re-engineered. DHS, which is simultaneously executing the White House's immigration enforcement plans, has not indicated any changes to FEMA's near-term Helene allocations, signaling dual-track priorities as repairs accelerate and communities press for sustained aid. Watch this.
Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem has announced an additional $28 million in reimbursement funds for the North Carolina disaster recovery. This brings the state's recovery reimbursements to a total of $124 million for this month alone. Earlier this week, Noem announced $96 million for Helene recovery. The funding will go towards road repairs, infrastructure, restoration, debris removal, and other emergency actions. FEMA is reimbursing these costs through its public assistance program.
The news continues after this break. Stay with us.
It's easy to set up, quick to start and packed with value. Smarter streaming starts here with the Alpha TV Stick. Just plug and stream anytime, anywhere. Discover a curated lineup of content designed to inspire, live broadcasts and global events, inspirational films and series, children's programming, healing and teaching sessions, all on demand. With millions of downloads worldwide, the Alpha TV app is transforming lives across the globe. And now, we're on a mission to reach 1 billion downloads of the Alpha TV app, and you can be part of it. Join the global wave with 1 billion Alpha TV app downloads worldwide. Bring the higher life into every home. Order your Alpha TV Stick today and experience smarter streaming. Alpha, the higher life is here.
Australia has expelled Iran's ambassador and pulled its diplomats from Tehran after the domestic spy agency concluded Iran directed 2 anti-Semitic arson attacks on Australian soil. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said ASIO assessed that Iran orchestrated the October 2024 firebombing of Lewis Continental Kitchen, a kosher food company in Sydney, and the December 2024 attack on Melbourne's Adas Israel Synagogue. Canberra closed its embassy, raised its travel advisory to do not travel, and urged Australians in Iran to leave as soon as possible if safe. ASIO Director General Mike Burgess said the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps used overseas cutout facilitators who tasked Australians, adding no Iranian diplomats in Australia were involved. Police have charged former Nomads Baiki chapter president Syed Mohammed Mousavi, 32 years old, over directing the Sydney attacks, while also including a misdirected strike on a nearby brewery, and they also charged Melbourne man Giovanni Laulu as one of the 3 alleged synagogue arsonists. The second 20-year-old suspect is due in court Wednesday. Iran denied the allegations. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called Albanese a weak politician and framed the rupture as punishment for Australian support for Palestinian statehood. Foreign Minister Penny Wong said Australia will introduce legislation to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization, and noted it is the first expulsion of an ambassador since World War II, while stressing limited diplomatic channels will remain to protect Australian interests. Albanese condemned the attacks as extraordinary and dangerous acts of aggression aimed at undermining social cohesion. Prosecutors continue to pursue the arson cases, and the government signaled further measures could follow as it implements the IRGC designation, manages consular risks, and reassesses security around religious institutions. Let's take a look.
Australia has blamed Iran for 2 anti-Semitic attacks in Sydney and Melbourne, and on Tuesday gave Iran's ambassador 7 days to leave the country. It's Australia's first expulsion of any envoy since the Second World War, and comes as anti-Semitic attacks and arson have ramped up since the Israel-Gaza war began in 2023. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation had gathered credible intelligence Iran had directed at least 2 attacks.
These were extraordinary and dangerous acts of aggression orchestrated by a foreign nation on Australian soil. They were attempts to undermine social cohesion and sow discord in our community.
Albanese said Iran had sought to disguise its involvement in last year's attack on the Adas Israel Synagogue in Melbourne and on a kosher restaurant in Sydney. 2 men have been charged over the Melbourne attack that set ablaze the synagogue. No injuries were reported in the attacks. Iran's foreign ministry, quoted in state media, said Australia's decision was motivated by internal affairs and anti-Semitism had no place in Iranian culture. They said they would take an appropriate decision in response. Australia has suspended operations at its embassy in Tehran, and all its diplomats were safe in a 3rd country, according to Albanese. Canberra said it would also designate Tehran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation.
Prime Minister Francois Bayrou has put his minority government to make or break confidence vote on September 8th, a high-stakes move that could force his resignation and plunge France back into political limbo. With opposition parties on the left and right signaling they will not come to his aid, Bayrou's chances of survival appear slim. The arithmetic is stark. 4 pro-government groups control about 210 of the National Assembly's 577 seats, while the combined opposition holds roughly 353. To scrape through, Bayrou would need a surprise abstention wave, notably from Marine Le Pen's National Party, or an unlikely affirmative vote from the socialists. Opposition leaders spent the past 24 hours ruling out both. Bayrou framed the vote as a choice between chaos and responsibility, warning that France must take back control of its debt. His fiscal push, including proposals to freeze public spending and scrap 2 public holidays, has already energized a nascent protest movement, Bloquons Tout, Let's Block Everything, which plans nationwide action on September 10th with backing from far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Unions are preparing separate demonstrations against austerity. The showdown caps a year of gridlock triggered by President Emmanuel Macron's snap dissolution in July 2024, which yielded a 3-way split among centrists, the populist right, and the left. Michael Barnier, Bayrou's predecessor, fell in December when the opposition united to defeat his budget. If Bayrou loses, Macron is expected to seek yet another prime minister, though the 1-year ban on a second dissolution has now lapsed, opening the door to new elections that could strengthen the right or simply reproduce the stalemate. Let's take a look.
François Bayrou says the move will raise the key issue of bringing France's finances under control.
I have asked the president, who agreed, to convene parliament in an extraordinary session on the 8th of September in 2 weeks' time.
The French Prime Minister's aim is to gain support for his €44 billion budget squeeze, as he tries to tackle a budget deficit that hit 5.8% of GDP last year, nearly double the official EU limit of 3%.
Our country is in danger because we are on the edge of over-indebtedness. Over the past 2 decades, despite the succession of several governments of different political leanings, our national debt has increased by €2 trillion.
2,000 milliards d'euros.
If he loses the confidence vote, Bayrou's minority government will fall. Both the Green Party and Hard Left didn't leave any suspense over which way they'd vote on September 8th, 2 days before planned protests backed by leftist parties.
We're delighted with this first victory for the popular movement, and we will vote to bring down Bayrou and his government.
Meanwhile, Marine Le Pen, as president of the single largest party in the French Assembly, the National Rally, said it would of course vote against the motion of confidence. French socialist lawmakers also indicated it would be difficult for them to support Bayrou. Among Bayrou's unpopular budget proposals is one to scrap 2 public holidays, and another to freeze welfare spending and tax brackets in 2026 at 2025 levels, not adjusting them for inflation.
Just before we end the news, let's take a quick look at tomorrow's weather forecast. And to end the news today, a quick recap of the headlines. Trump moves to revive death penalty in Washington, D.C. amid crime crackdown. The FBI probe of John Bolton set to extend beyond book as legal risks mount. The U.S. threatens funding cuts to 3 states over trucker English proficiency enforcement. A judge dismisses the Trump administration's suit against Maryland's federal judges, warns of potentially calamitous precedent. And Fed Governor Lisa Cook rejects removal letter and vows to stay as legal fight looms. And that's the news for today. Join us at the same time tomorrow for more news. I'm TGK Andre. Good night, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.